Okay, now we're going to talk about the executive branch in California, aka the governor's office and other executive agencies. So California has a plural elective. So our state executive is we have the state executive actions versus U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Let's talk about that. So the Supreme Court announced striking down a national right to abortion, and it cramped states' abilities to deny CCWs, concealed carry permits, and curtailing the EPA's authority. So the court's conservative majority made it clear they would forge a different balance of power between state and federal governments, because we do have a very right-leaning Supreme Court right now. So our Attorney General, his name is Rob Bonta, he swore to curtail illegal firearm sales within the state of California. And Governor Newsom has signed a law protecting all persons from civil liability for providing, aiding, or receiving abortion care in the state, and has been expanding alliances to globally fight climate change. So let's talk about the idea of a single leader versus a plural executive. So the founders of the United States argued that only a single individual could bring energy to an executive office that would otherwise be fractured by competing ambitions and differences of opinion. California has a plural elective comprises of 8 constitutional executive officers plus a 5-member board. So the success is conditioned by partisan loyalties and personal relationships. The administrative duties are spread over the constitutional officers. Elected executives who are ideologically compatible largely support each other's decisions. So it's interesting to note that these offices, it's not like a team, like the president runs on a ticket. These are all individual offices. So it is kind of can be inconsistent when there's Democrats and Republicans in both in the offices split, rather than having complete Democrats or complete Republicans. So there are term limits, and those affect how executives behave. They have 2 4-year term limits, and usually members of the same party avoid challenging each other and wait for the open seat, kind of like a political courtesy. So the executives want to build their own name brand. Think of what Gavin Newsom's doing lately. He had the Hannity debate. He went to China. He went to Israel. So despite their responsibilities, a lot of these executives work to remain obscure to average residents. Newsom, he was the mayor of San Francisco, and then worked his way up. So even high-profile state executives need to create name recognition across a wide and inattentive electorate. For example, Kamala Harris announced her candidacy for Senate almost 2 years ahead of the 2016 election. She might have tried to run for governor, but she knew that then Lieutenant Governor Newsom was aiming for it, so she decided to run for Senate. So the executive agenda, it does carry over to the federal and state levels. So, for example, the federal federal administrators direct departments and agencies to implement the president's agenda, right? His cabinet. In California, we have an assortment of departments, agencies, and boards and commissions that serve different masters. The governor, other California executives, legislature, and other entities are supposed to regulate. We try to disperse this power among several top offices. So there are several state organizations. Some retain independent regulatory power, and many more follow the governor's lead. In theory, this dispersion of power inoculates government against the worst effects of a single inept leader, but fragments the idea of accountability. So California has a tangled web of bureaucracy, but isn't that what bureaucracy is anyways? So in this tangled web, the governor makes annual budgetary choices, but the elected state superintendent of public instruction oversees the Department of Education. So we have that power spread. And then Governor Newsom, has added various commissions and task forces to try and trim the bureaucratic mix. So let's talk specifically about the governor. As per the state constitution, supreme executive power is vested in the governor. None of the 11 other elected executive officers take direction from the governor, although the governor can require those peers to produce information relevant to their jobs. The duties of our governor mirror those of governors of other states. What distinguishes the office of the California governor is the size and hyperdiversity of the constituency, as well as the resulting volume of conflicts. So our election process is long and expensive. Arnold Schwarzenegger initially escaped this primary and general election contest because he won through the direct recall election. But it's on par to somewhat of the presidential election, right? We have the primaries, and then the top two from the parties in the primaries move on. So what helps someone get elected to office, right? Those with prior elected experience, strong partisans, and good fundraisers tend to survive the process. This helped Newsom win the seat in 2018, and it also helped him defeat the recall efforts. So the California's governor is considered the head of state for California. He appears at official ceremonies and public events. He summarizes California's outlook and their agenda in the annual State of the State address. He receives and entertains foreign dignitaries. He speaks for Californians on both the national and international political stages. He is the state's official liaison. He functions as the state's official liaison to federal officials in Washington, D.C. He works with other state governors to advance causes nationally. You might recall during COVID, there was times where the President's Task Force talked about meeting with all the governors, and that's when they were working nationally to try and solve the issue. Our governor signs agreements. He may sign memorandums of understanding or cooperation to share information or technology. But these are not legally binding because state officials cannot make foreign treaties. So whatever he did with Xi is not binding. So he is also the chief executive. He executes California's law with the support, right? He putting the law into practice is not something only he can do. He has various law enforcement agencies that implement, and administrative agencies that implement these laws. He also appoints members to the board and commissions. We have over 320 state boards and commissions with more than 2,000 slots. A lot of these are volunteer positions, so he, gets to make those appointments. Some of these appointments do require approval from the Senate, and only a few of these people actually serve at the governor's pleasure, meaning that if they kind of irritate him, they can be let go. So on the rare occasions, such as the passing of Dianne Feinstein, he actually has the ability to nominate someone directly to the U.S. Senate. The governor also is the person who appoints judges throughout the Superior Court and appellate levels. He also issues proclamations and executive orders. So he might issue formal declarations, such as when he ordered everyone to stay home during COVID. These can also instruct state employees on how to implement a law or policy, but his power falls short of forcing constitutional partners like the Attorney General to act. He has, his emergency powers. And the executive orders are similar to the federal executive orders. At the state level, they're the governor's written instructions to state employees about how to implement his laws and policy. So the governor does have some legislative powers. He can set policy priorities and call special elections by dealing with pressing matters. If he thinks it's something that needs to be dealt with, he can, even call extra legislative sessions. He does have dedicated long-term staff. They're permanent executive branch employees. Those are our professional government employees. These are the ones who don't worry about partisanship. They want to just make sure the government works. He proposes laws and signals to legislators, what he would sign and what he wouldn't sign. And of course, he has the power to veto legislation he does not like. Okay. So let's talk about the term gubernatorial. I'm sure we've all heard it. That is of or relating to the governor. So what is a line item veto? That is a governor's ability to cross out or veto items with with his line them out, to get rid of them. So it is rare, but can happen, where his veto is overridden. You're probably not going to see it happen right now because, the state assembly and state senate are both controlled by the Democrats. But let's say if it was controlled by the Republicans, we might see an attempt of vetoes. The governor has budgeting power. So the state legislators approve the budget, but the governor is the one who actually submits the budget. So he submits the budget by January 10th, and this is arguably a powerful advantage over the legislative branch because he has the Department of Finance that can actually prepare the budget. Don't think Gavin Newsom's out there figuring out how to balance the state's checkbook. They work with the governor to get this budget stuff done. And the director of finance from the Department of Finance helps as a chief fiscal policy advisor. Remember, similar to the president, a governor can't be an expert in everything. He needs people that he can trust to assist him, and that this is one of those people. So California's governor is also the chief of security of the state. He has emergency powers. And so when we talk about the idea of a police power, that is basically anything he needs to do to keep us safe. That can be public health wise, that can be, justice wise, whatever. So the governor can call a state of emergency during things like a pandemic, a drought, or, terrorist act. He is also the commander-in-chief of the State National Guard. So the State National Guard are your citizen soldiers who are called on at a short notice for humanitarian, peacekeeping, or combat missions. Generally they are not authorized to engage in domestic armed conflict, so he can't create them to be his own private army to, round up all the Republicans or something. So he has exclusive control of the state military reserve, where we have the California Army National Guard and the Air National Guard that deals with cyberspace, space, drone, and air capabilities that provide support. And he can also authorize troops to assist with international disaster response and recovery. A lot of times what you'll see is when different guardsmen go during hurricanes and things like that to other states to help them. As chief of security, the governor can also modify sentences or penalties associated with crime. So, he can offer clemency and pardon offenders or commute sentences. There's this idea of a medical reprieve. One of the Manson girls was actually let out due to medical issues because she had cancer. So they want to let some incarcerated inmates, despite whatever crimes and horrors that they have committed. This medical reprieve idea believes that if they're sick or have cancer, they're likely not to reoffend, so they'll let them live out their final days outside of prison. The idea of pardoning. The offense stays on the individual's record, but you can't, impose other restrictions, such as an inability to get a professional license or possess a gun. And Governor Newsom has suspended the death penalty, which, California, I've studied the death penalty extensively. California needs to either just abolish it if we don't want to have it, or come up with a working system. And the governor has the authority to extradite fugitives from other states. If a law enforcement agency wants to extradite a fugitive from California, they must obtain what's called a governor's warrant in order to transfer jurisdictions and assert jurisdiction over the fugitive. So what are the sources of power, for this guy? So while the state governor's powers resemble those of U.S. presidents, the structure of the plural executive introduces some constraints. So the governor sets policy priorities through budget, but shares responsibility for day-to-day administration with other elected executive officers and career state employees who may have different agendas. To overcome this, the governor must draw on the sources of power to be an effective leader. The institutional sources of power are, whether the governor's political party holds a majority in both the Assembly and the Senate, and the numerical advantage of that majority. He has the cohesiveness of parties in the legislature that brings up, some Moderate Democrats may make a Democratic governor's job of reaching compromises harder. Um, Rigid extreme partisans could thwart a moderate governor's plans by obstructing specific bill language or foiling supermajority votes. Shared partisanship among executive officers can provide more governing consistency. The sources of power are, popularity, personal qualities, and style. The governor's reputation as a loyal partisan friend or an untrustworthy party traitor affects the ability to attract legislation support. The governor should have personal charisma, the power to persuade, perception of having a mandate, and the strategic use of the media to base his power. So a lifelong political experience can, help build that support, right? So we have different governors that have different styles. Said Jerry Brown, just not a very nice man when I got to meet him. All right, let's talk about these constitutional executive officers. We have a lieutenant governor, who, if the governor leaves the state, the lieutenant governor takes temporary control. Should the governor resign, retire, become disabled, the lieutenant governor takes the office. The lieutenant governor is president of the Senate and may cast a rare tie-breaking vote. So what federal offices is similar? Similar to like the vice president. The lieutenant governor is a voting member of the Cal State University Board of Trustees and the UC Board of Regents. And the lieutenant governor sits on several other regulatory and advisory state boards. Then we have the attorney general. He is our chief law enforcement officer. He operates the Department of Justice and provides legal counsel to state officials. He coordinates statewide narcotics enforcement efforts, lots of different law enforcement things he does. He has a staff of about 6,000 people. This office is inherently political. Kind of interesting because the part of the job of the Attorney General is to ensure that it's to represent the state of California in all capital cases. Well, when you have officials in the Attorney General's office that don't believe in the death penalty, how can they adequately represent their clients, the state of California, and the people of the state? Then we have the Secretary of State. They're our chief elections officers. They run the elections. They have more than 550 employees who help this. This includes registering voter, distributing voter information guides in 10 languages, certifying the integrity of voting machines, and publishing and certifying election results. So this is more about the Secretary of State. They make it easier to vote legitimately. We have the Vote Cal database that expanded voter registration services. You have online registration to vote, so all y'all who aren't registered, you can register online. Pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, all mail-in ballot elections, ballot tracking. It is kind of nice when you put your ballot in the box that you can get notified when it's actually counted to make sure it does get counted. They have a political reform division that implements new rules. The division, wants to make sure there's proper disclosure of lobbying and campaign finance activity and make that information available electronically. The Secretary of State keeps records and maintains registries. They're the keeper of official historical records, charters, corporations, anything relating to election, to business records as well. They have public notaries that certify documents and maintain registries of domestic partnerships, advanced healthcare directives, and safe-at-home documents. So safe-at-home documents are when a woman or any kind of abused spouse leaves an abusive relationship and then go into a protection program. They have a safe-at-home type documentation. Then we have fragmented authority with some of them. So our controller we have 3 different offices that regulate the money flow in California. The controller, who is our chief fiscal officer, who pays the state's bills and continually tracks the state's financial situation. He's the one that balances that checkbook, figures out what's coming in and what's coming out. So then we have the treasurer, who is the state's banker, who manages investments, assets, and bonds, and our debt. He manages the state's debt by selling and repaying bonds on an ongoing basis. He has about 250 employees. Then we have the 5-member Board of Equalization, and they are established to ensure that property taxes and fees were collected uniformly throughout the state. Then we have the Office of the Insurance Commissioner, who oversees the insurance industry, arguably not that well since so many of the companies are leaving the state of California. Voters have rebelled against spiraling auto insurance rates and elected the Office of Insurance Commissioner from a governor-appointed sub-agency to a full-scale executive office. We want to make sure that these companies are not predatory. They deal with rates for car, homeowners insurance. They investigate insurance fraud complaints. They make sure that insurance companies are solvent, that they license agents and oversee, complaints. The department has asserted its role in reviewing health insurance rate increases. Then we have the superintendent of public schools, state-only, nonpartisan executive officer who is really cares about the intensity and polarization. He cared about prolonged school closures. We went into the school of Zoom University, right? He heads the Department of Education and chairs the State Board of Education, developing curriculum, education standards, instructional materials, and assessments. And there's no institutional mechanism that exists to coordinate the work of these officers. So it's not like the Constitution says, the State Board of Public Superintendent of Public Institution does this. The Insurance Commissioner does that. These were shaped by the work done by these officials. So then we have some administrators and regulators. So there are several secretaries that head the different agencies, like the Secretary of the DMV, things like that. Almost all are linked to the governor through secretaries of each, the heads of major agencies or directors. Every organization is designed to help the governor execute the state laws. Periodically, they need to reorganize. It happens, right? Every organization sometimes has to look reflectively and see what they want to do to make things better. So to streamline operations and abolish haphazard structures added over the years, former Governor Jerry Brown reduced the size of state government by consolidating several entities, aiming to make government easier to manage and more coordinated and efficient so it could be more cost-effective to service. So he dealt with super agencies where he took large state agencies and had them oversee smaller departments and boards. There are 7 super agencies. One of them is I lost that train of thought. We also have commissions and boards with independent authority. About a dozen possess independent advisory, regulatory, or administrative authority and are led by either gubernatorial appointees confirmed by the Senate or chosen by legislative leaders. That includes the Public Utilities Commission, which regulates private companies to ensure they safely, affordably, and reliably provide essentials like gas, transit, communications, and water. Okay, then some of these, administrators and regulators do have competing viewpoints. Full turnover of a board's membership rarely occurs during a governor's term, so competing viewpoints can be represented. These are unelected officials who can establish regulations, and most organizations operate autonomously and don't need to consult with the governor. Okay, so that is our overview of the California State Executive Branch.